Have a good day. In this video we will discuss Chapter 8. Historical research. Historical research does not have the rigor of such research methods as experimental and survey methods. Others argue that historical research can meet the standards of inquiry of other methods. Regardless, there is a consensus that historical research has much to contribute to library and information science. Nature and value of historical research. As used by the Greeks, history meant an inquiry designed to reconstruct past events, and, in a sense, historical research can still be defined as a scholarly attempt to discover what has happened. Currently, historical research, or documentary research as it is sometimes labeled, although historical research is not limited to documents, typically goes beyond mere description and attempts to interpret the facts as reconstructed. The basic purposes of historical research are to provide a clear perspective of the present and to facilitate planning for the future by identifying general principles applicable to recurring situations. Chronology. Chronology can be defined as simply the describing of events in the order of their occurrence, a process similar to the older concept of historical. Importance of historical research to librarianship. In addition to fulfilling the basic purposes noted above, historical research can make specific contributions to the advancement of library and information science. As Busha and Harder indicate, historical research can contribute to the body of knowledge about librarianship. It can increase our understanding of how, when, and why past events occurred, and it can expand our appreciation of the significance of these events. Hillway identifies 6 different types of historical research or documentary study, and these are: 1. Biographical research. 2. Histories of institutions and organizations. 3. The investigation of sources and influences. 4. Editing and translating historical documents. 5. Studying the history of ideas. And 6. Compiling bibliographies. Sources of historical information. The data gathered in historical research can come from a wide variety of sources. Among the more commonly used are the following. 1. Official records, such as laws, deeds, annual reports of organizations, charters, and so on. 2. Newspapers and other periodicals. 3. Eyewitness accounts of events. 4. Archives. 5. Manuscripts. 6. Letters and personal diaries. 7. Biographies, autobiographies, and memoirs. 8. Historical studies. 9. Literary writings. 10. Oral evidence. 11. Memorials. 12. Catalogs. 13. Schedules, agendas, and so on. 14. Archaeological and geological remains non-documents. Evaluation of historical sources. In selecting specific sources of data for a historical study, it is critical that they be evaluated properly. The researcher should want to know if the sources are relevant to the study, substantial enough to be worthwhile, and competent, which is genuine, accurate, and reasonable. The assessment of the last criterion, competency, should involve 2 basic processes: external criticism and internal criticism. External criticism, or the gathering of external evidence, is done to determine if a source in fact provides authentic, primary data. The process of external criticism is crucial to the credibility of historical research. External criticism may be used interchangeably with textual criticism and usually takes into account the provenance, or origin, of a document. Internal criticism. Having decided that a document or source is genuine, the researcher should then confirm the validity and reliability of its contents. He or she is concerned, at this point, with what the source says, its meaning, accuracy, and general trustworthiness. Internal criticism is generally more challenging than external criticism, and it too is often difficult, if not impossible, to achieve with absolute certainty. Basic steps of historical research. Historical research tends to involve the following steps. 1. Identification of a problem of historical significance. 2. Collection of background information. 3. Formulation of a hypothesis when possible. 4. Gathering of evidence or data, including verification of the authenticity of the primary sources and the validity and reliability of their contents. 5. Organization and analysis of the pertinent data, more often qualitative than quantitative. 6. Interpretation of the findings or the drawing of conclusions. The hypothesis in historical research. The hypothesis is a natural and useful device in the historical method. More specifically, the use of a hypothesis in historical research helps to increase the objectivity of the study and minimize researcher bias. It also guides the researcher in the collection, analysis, and interpretation of data by indicating what is relevant to the study. The presentation of findings. Historical writings are represented by a variety of literary forms which combine description, narrative, and analysis in different ways and proportions. Description and narrative tend to suffice when the historian merely desires to recreate the past, while analysis is necessary for interpretation of the past. Library history. Shiflett defines library history as a rubric that covers a myriad of topics associated with libraries and other information systems. Its major form consists of the traditional library, but it also includes the history of any activity or event that might be part of the domain of library and information science. Bibliographical research. Another area of scholarly work that some consider to be a special type of historical research is bibliographical research. Others would argue that bibliographical research does not represent true research, at least as prescribed by the scientific method of inquiry. Most would concede, however, that bibliographical research that takes the form of descriptive bibliography certainly comes closer to being true research than does systematic or enumerative bibliography. Systematic bibliography. Persons involved in the compilation of systematic or enumerative bibliographies are concerned with the book and other materials as an intellectual entity. Their purpose is to assemble information about individual works into a logical and useful arrangement. Descriptive bibliography. In contrast to systematic bibliography, descriptive bibliography is concerned with the book as a physical entity or material object. As was noted above, it resembles true research more than does systematic bibliography. Problems in historical research. A variety of problems are common to most types of research but tend to be particularly important in historical research, including the following. 1. Deciding how much data are enough. This tends to be a relatively subjective decision. At one time, historians generally attempted to collect virtually all relevant data. They now tend toward a more selective approach. 2. Improperly selecting data. Briefly stated, the historian must avoid improper or faulty selection of data, including such tactics as ignoring some data, exaggerating others, and so on. Such action will significantly increase the bias in a study. 3. Relying too heavily on secondary sources of information. This is particularly likely in studies not dealing with relatively recent events. 4. Investigating an overly broad problem. This is difficult to avoid because historical issues tend to be complex. 5. Failing to evaluate adequately the historical data and their sources. These techniques were addressed in an earlier section. 6. Failing to interpret the data. As was noted earlier, historical research is most productive when the researcher attempts to synthesize or integrate the facts into meaningful generalizations. 7. Reading the present into the past even though the historical data may not support such an interpretation. The historical researcher must work from evidence back to the event. In addition, the historian is usually in the situation of having to investigate exceptionally complex phenomena. Consequently, it is especially difficult for the historian to support causality within a relationship, or even to draw conclusions with a very high level of confidence. That's all. Thank you and God bless.